Good morning. Thanks for joining us today for a new to market presentation by Sierra Madre, who went public this week under the ticker SM on the TSXV. I'm really excited to hear this story. With me, I have CEO Alex Langer and VP Exploration Greg Liller. Before we get started, as always, this presentation will contain forward-looking statements. If you'd like to know more about those, you can find them on the company's website, their disclosure. And there will be a Q&A section at the end, so feel free to input your Q&A in the box at the bottom of your screen. And I do apologize that we're a little bit late getting started, so appreciate your patience. With that all out of the way, Alex, Greg, nice to see you.
Good morning. Thank you, Deborah.
Congrats on the listing. Successful couple days of trading.
So far, so good. We're excited. There's been some good volumes in the stock, which is always important, which everyone likes to see. So the previous financing was at 50 cents, and today we're kind of pushing up towards, looking at right now, 89 cents. So yeah, it's good. I think everyone is pretty pleased, and yeah, we're continuing onwards.
I think you hit a high of 115 or 114 the first day of trading.
We did, yeah. There's a few hundred shares. We kind of opened at $1, and some of the. We traded 1.7 million shares the first day, so pretty significant amount. The float as it stands right now is about 34 million. So we turned over quite a bit. I know we've been buying as well, so it's been good. Yeah, really happy with it. And
one of the other companies you're involved in had some great news this morning as well.
Yeah, Kingfisher, another company we helped set up. They had their first drill results ever, which was pretty spectacular, just from a backpack drill rig, but really, really impressive what those guys are up to.
Great. Well, we're here to talk about Sierra Madre, so why don't you give us a little bit of background on yourself and the company and walk us through the story.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, first off, we are a group of capital markets and mining professionals that have come together to build a junior silver gold mining company. Our goal is to eventually grow into a junior mid-tier producer through further project acquisitions and further development. We are focusing our search in the western Mexican state of Niary and the neighboring areas. That's kind of the holistic idea of what we're trying to build. A little bit about myself. I started at Canaccord Genuity in the early 2000s. I spent about 5 years there, mainly focusing on early stage mining investment. A number of the companies that we had IPO during the time were Endeavour Silver, Fortuna Silver, Great Panther. So obviously got quite comfortable with Mexico and quite excited in silver. So it's kind of coming full circle. Over the past 13 years, I've been on the corporate side. Most recently, I guess the last two companies that I've been a part of and helped found. One was Millennial Lithium, which is a lithium brine project in Argentina that started at 30 cents and now are above $3 and completed full definitive feasibility study. And the other one is Prime Mining, which a year ago had a 30 million market cap and as of today, just under 300 million. You'll notice a lot of similar names with Prime Mining, Greg Liller, myself, and a number of others. Prime is also in Mexico, so we're really quite comfortable with the area. My expertise is really on the capital market side, so structuring companies, investor relations, capital raising, and also putting together management teams. I'll let Greg introduce himself, but I've known Greg since, I think, 2010. We worked together at a company called Oracle Mining, which had a copper project in Arizona. And since then, we've become quite good friends. Greg is pretty amazing in terms of what he's accomplished in his career, and he'll get into it. But yeah, Greg's a geologist, lives in Tucson, Arizona, and I'll let him introduce himself. Go ahead, Greg.
Thank you, Alex. I've been in the business for well over 40 years, primarily gold and silver, some copper, even some uranium in the beginning. I've been lucky. I've had 7 of the projects I played a major role in become mines over the years. Perhaps the biggest one, I think, was Ocampo, which was a 11,600 ton a day open pit and a 1,500 ton a day open or underground mine. But I've been working in Mexico since the early 90s. I've kind of got a team that I put together over the years down there that kind of, for some reason, they move around with me from place to place. And I think that's very important to have your own team. A lot of people run their programs with consultants And consultants are generally, they're just day workers. They don't have any skin in the game. But if you put together your own group and make them part of the company, I think you're a lot more successful in doing so. Anyway, you want to run through the corporate end of things, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely. There we go. I guess maybe we should start at the beginning. We haven't really explained the story. So what was it, 3 years ago, you and I connected?
Yeah. Another director, Alejandro Carvalho, who I'd known from the Gammon days, he had talked me into coming out of retirement for the third time. And I was bored. And Alejandro and I started looking at properties, and I immediately talked to Alex, what can we do to put this together and make a public company out of it? So yeah, it was a long 4 years, but I think it was definitely worth it.
Yeah, I know. I remember that time and really just jumped at the opportunity. I know when we were chatting, the whole idea and what we wanted to build wasn't just a single company project. We really felt there was an opportunity to, grow something bigger, kind of like a junior mid-tier silver company. At the time, there really wasn't too much to invest in, to be honest. There's a lot more silver companies now and a lot of good companies. But 3-4 years ago, it was few and far between. There was the Endeavours, the Fortunas, Pan American, companies like that. But if you wanted something on the smaller end, which had the larger delta in terms of capital risk, there really wasn't much. So that was the idea of what we started to build. And I guess about 3.5 years ago, Sierra Madre Gold and Silver was formed. Management team, we'll get into that a little bit later. We recently closed our, IPO financing. It was a subscription receipt financing where we raised just over $15 million. So we're well capitalized. We do have one project. It's the Tepic Silver Gold project, and Greg will get into that a little bit further. Tepic, we own 100%. The previous operators of Tepic actually had a market cap of over $100 million. They spent approximately $20 million in today's value in the ground, including over 31,000 meters of drilling, which we have full access to. We have the full set of drill core in our storage facility. They've also done quite a bit of met work that we'll get into it in a little bit. Beyond Tepic, we are looking at a number of the projects. I think Greg database is up to over 300 now, kind of in and around that area.
There's another zero behind that.
Okay, 3,000. Yeah. So if you look at what we raised 15 million. It's a bit more than we needed in terms of what we're spending at Tepic this year. But we have a clear focus to acquire more projects. We feel there's an opportunity to consolidate the area in and around Niurite. The whole hope would be to have, production from 2 or 3 different points and kind of a hub and spoke mining model where we would have a centralized milling facility. But we'll get into that a little bit later. Obviously, when you look at any junior mining company, management is key. Greg already spoke of himself. Greg is a geologist by training, but he's been forced to run and operate a number of mines, including production. So we're not afraid of production. It's actually what we're looking for. A lot of companies you'll see, they, get an asset, they raise some capital, they drill it up and hope somebody else to take it over. We're quite comfortable with production. It's actually something we want. We're not really after the super large projects, so we don't have too much competition in terms of other companies. We're comfortable with smaller size projects, lower capex that are, in essence, a little bit higher grade. And if we can bundle a few of these together, and then you have that accretive acquisitions that, start to make a lot of sense. The rest of our managed team, you can see here. One gentleman I'll highlight is Greg Smith. So Greg is our director, also vice president of exploration. Greg is Spanish speaking. He was most recently CEO of Calibre Mining. Nicaragua has done quite well. Previously to that, I think Greg spent about 17 years in Venezuela, where he drilled out close to 12 million ounces of gold. Kerry Spong is our CFO. Lots of in-country Mexican experience. And super helpful. Rest of the board of directors are here. 2 gentlemen I'd really like to highlight, one being Jorge Ramiro, the other one Alejandro Carvalho. Greg touched on Alejandro earlier. Both these men are Mexican. Jorge, you might have heard of. Jorge is the founder of a company called Emerging Markets Capital in Hong Kong, but more recently he's founder and CEO of another silver company in Mexico called Reyna Silver, which has done quite well. They have a lot of contacts in Mexico, and we've been able to kind kind of leverage those relationships. Alejandro Caraveo, who Greg mentioned earlier, has worked with Greg numerous times before. Alejandro lives in Mexico. He kind of runs our corporate operations in Mexico, and it needs to be signed, working with the local communities, ejidos. He's the director of the company, but also our in-country manager, which is super, super helpful. Also show your attention to a gentleman named Andy Bowering. Andy is the first member of our advisory board. He's also a significant shareholder of Sierra Madre and invaluable help for what we're doing. Andy is currently a founder and executive vice president of Prime Mining, but he was CEO and really started that company. And you'll notice some of these names, Jorge, Alejandro, also part of Prime Mining. Andy's our first member of the advisory board, and we will be adding a few more as we progress here shortly. And with that, I'll pass you over to Greg to walk you through Tepic and our strategy to extract value.
The Tepic project is located about a 30-minute drive from downtown Tepic, which is the capital of Niurite. So the infrastructure is great. That's one of my boxes that I tick off when I evaluate projects. I've worked on projects that were way up in the Sierras. It's difficult access, difficult working conditions. So you've got to take that into consideration. This project is a dream in terms of infrastructure. The access to the property is paved roads for all but the last 3 kilometers or so. Again, we've got access to the electrical grid, and Tepic is in a mining-friendly jurisdiction. I should say, why Niurite? I've always liked Niurite. Years ago, Niary Gold was actually my idea, and I forget what that got to in market cap. It was quite a bit before it was absorbed by Gammon Gold, Arico. But I've always felt that Niurite's an overlooked area. Never had any huge deposits found there, but there are old mines all over. So the whole concept is we start with this project, we're looking at others, and again, it's that hub and spoke so that you can take a couple of medium-sized projects, put them all together, feed to a central processing facility, and then you have a big mine, production-wise. So that was the concept behind getting started. Next slide. The Tepic is a low sulfidation epithermal gold-silver deposit, fairly typical of the whole Sierra Madre mineral belt. It had been drilled extensively in 4 areas by the previous operators, and they had established a historic resource that totals around 10 million ounces in all categories of silver equivalent. The metallurgical test work that they did shows that it can be recovered. That's another one of the boxes I tick off when we go in and acquire a project is if you can't get the metal out of the rock, it's just a rock. So, but the main thing here too is that I saw a big exploration potential in this project. Go to the next slide, please. You can see the core area veins here in red. That's where most of the historic work has been done. After we assembled our geologic team, and I should say our senior geologists total about 90 years worth of experience. So, I mean, we've got a really good crew put together here. And we acquired new satellite imagery, and out of that had a ortho topo map constructed. So we immediately starting the core area and then moving outward with geologic and reconnaissance sampling. We got a really good deal on this project too. That's another thing I always look for is you can't be locked up with ridiculous down the road property payments that, when it comes time to make them, you don't have the money, then what do you do? This one was a really good deal. I think we just happened to come in at the right time for the gentleman that owned the claims. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is our core area. There were 4 deposits that had a historic resource on them, the Dos Hornos 1 and 2, Santo Tomas, and Once Bocas North. This is a work in progress. This shows some of our preliminary results. And as you can see, we've found a lot more mineralized structures that have been recognized there in the past. This is developing into what looks to be a very large epithermal system. So I'm very confident that we'll be able to really add some value and build the resources as time goes by. There was one issue in the previous drilling. They used only core, and they typically had pretty poor recovery in the mineralized breccias and veins. I think the average so far from the data that we have looks to be about 76%. Some sampling in historic colonial workings adjacent to where these holes were drilled returned for cream a much higher grade than they were seeing in the drill holes. So they were somewhat frustrated about that. There's a project to the south of us that's currently in production, and it passed through 2 juniors' hands in the 2000s. Same situation. They had poor core recovery. They threw up their hands and walked away from it. The third company came in, and they just immediately went into production on it. And they've been producing out of the mine there at a modest scale for 5 or 6 years now. So the idea here then is if we come in with an RC program, we might see a significant upgrade in gold and silver. We'll just have to see. Dr. Drill is the only consultant that I've never had lie to me. Next slide. That's our base that we're starting from. And again, this was only 4 areas. And as our compilation goes on, we'll be reporting on how much more we've found. It's a work in progress right now. Next slide. The old operators had a very, very complicated structural view of this that just didn't make sense to me. For example, here at the Dos Hornos 1, they had it, that's the northern vein that's on the maps, vein breccia. They had it cut off by a fault. I've walked around in the field. Geologists have mapped the area. Now there's faulting, but there's no evidence that it just cuts everything off. So that's our new interpretation on the other side, which essentially doubles the potential strike length of the Dos Hornos 1 and 2 structures. Next slide. You can see here it's a cross section through Dos Hornos, or a long section through Dos Hornos 1. Even their drilling backs this up. That's the plus 75 gram polygons in red, and as you can see, it's open both up dip and to the southeast. So again, drilling's going to tell us. Next slide. You can see we've got now some structures to the north that we found that have some very good grades. I believe that's above 340 magenta dots, and we've expanded off to the west in our reconnaissance sampling. So again, it's a work in progress. They're working every day. They're taking more samples, more mapping. A lot of the rock types that we're seeing now at surface are indicative of being in the upper portions of the boiling zone, which is where the gold and silver drops out. So it's everything's coming together and making this look like it's a much larger project than first glance would make it. Next slide, please. These are the results of the preliminary metallurgical work that's been done. Fairly typical, actually, of the Sierra Madre gold or silver and gold deposits. What's really interesting is this flotation followed by cyanide leaching of the tails. Those are really good recoveries there. And in some respects, to build a combination flotation cyanide plant is really cost effective. You reduce your the amount of material that you have going through your leaching tanks. The tails can be leached more rapidly, and then you just do an intensive cyanidization of your flotation product, and you end up with a good doré product, easily transportable, and you avoid smelter treatment and refining costs by doing it that way. Next slide. Okay. This is kind of our timeline. Alex, do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. So it gives you a rough estimate and a rough timeline of what we're trying to achieve over the next little while here. Obviously, we started trading on Monday, so we've hit that milestone. We are going to be drilling here quite soon. Greg, I think the phase 1 drill program is how many holes?
We're going to do 2021, I believe. And I should say I was just down on site last week. I finally was let out of COVID quarantine. And so the first thing I did was head down there and just observed what a great team we have, and they're putting it together. But no, all the groundwork's laid for drilling.
Great. So that's going to start relatively soon. From there, we're going to move into phase 2 relatively quickly once we get the assay results. And we are fully permitted up to 67 drill holes, but it is quite easy to extend that. So we see a real opportunity to continue that program up to 150 to 200 drill holes. If all goes well and the weather cooperates and the assay labs cooperate, we'll be able to hopefully produce an NI 43-101 compliant resource by year's end. There's a caveat there, again, with the assay time turnaround and things like that. It might be pushed into the first quarter of next year, but we're quite excited. So if that comes out positive and we're happy with the number, from there we would move into obviously further drilling and further expansion, but really get into further engineering work, scoping studies and PEA level, work as well. In the meantime, we are looking at other projects to acquire. One thing I should mention is if you look at our prospectus, we actually have over $5 million earmarked for project acquisition and further work for those projects. So do expect to see that in the coming year as well. I mentioned earlier, share structure. I find that it's really important to have a strong, tight share structure right out of the gate. If you don't, it can really hamper development of companies. Even if you have a really great project, if you don't have the right share structure, it can make things really, really difficult, especially in a tougher market. So we've been fortunate enough that I think our share structure is excellent. 64 million shares outstanding now. Fully diluted is only 66 million. That's 2 million in broker warrants, which would bring in another million into our treasury. We'll eventually cross those out, but they're all in friendly hands. If you take a look at the shareholdings of management and founders, we're at 37%, which is really high, I think, for this stage company. I think it's actually a little bit higher as we've been buying the last few days here. So we're moving into around 40%. Institutions are at 7.4%, and that's a decent sized ownership for now. If you take a look at that number, it's actually spread across 10 different institutions. So usually when groups, at least some of these groups, come into a story, they're not in it for a few $100,000. They really want to see an opportunity where they can invest significant amounts to really move the needle. Some of these are closing in on $1 billion funds. So for them to trust in us in a smaller amount, with a full understanding that everything goes well and we're able to, achieve our goals, acquire new projects, and push Tepic along, they'll have an opportunity down the road to invest further. So far so good, and we're really happy to have those types of investors with us. As I mentioned, we have over $15 million in hand. Phase 1 drill program will be starting shortly, and then of course further project acquisitions. This is just a share price comparison of some silver-focused companies in and around the world. Obviously, we started here at a 34 million market cap. We've kind of moved past that. We're working our way up the mark there. Today, I think we're just over 50 million in market cap. So we're really trying to get in line with some of our peers. I think as we de-risk Tepic and add, to the resource and add further projects, you're really going to see us kind of move up that chain to, better reflect the market cap potential of what we are building here. In summary, Tepic is our flagship project to start. Infrastructure is excellent. That's what Greg had mentioned earlier. Really close to the town of Tepic, easy to get to. There's numerous mills and facilities close by. So if we do want to eventually move into a hub and spoke kind of mining scenario, we could acquire some mills. We could build our own centralized facility. So we have a lot of options. It's an area that hasn't been consolidated, but we're going to be working towards that. As Greg mentioned, looks like the mineralized zone is much larger than we had originally thought. So we'll be moving up the phase 2 drilling program from approximately 50 holes to close to 150 to 200 time dependent. We have a historic resource there, just over 10 million ounces. Previous operators had over 100 million market cap. As Greg mentioned, geological setting is great to find more ounces within our project alone. And that's about it. Thank you so much for your time. I'm sure if there's any questions, Greg and I are happy to stick around and answer any that you might have.
Actually, I have some questions to start off.
Absolutely.
This one's for Greg. Greg, you had mentioned that mining had been overlooked, or a number of projects have been overlooked at Niary. What's the reason for that?
It never had the really big mines like Guanajuato had with Las Torres and the Veta Madre, or Zacatecas. It was one of the first areas that the Spanish found gold and silver in. And I think it was called the Espiritu Santos mine, was in production in around the 1540s. Reported grades there were just phenomenal. Nobody's been able to pinpoint exactly where it was. But the Spanish had, throughout colonial times, had small operations throughout the state. Like I said, when even back in the early mid-2000s, it was being overlooked, and that's where I came up with the idea for Niurite Gold. After that, a few people came in, but it's never received the intensive exploration efforts that other areas in Mexico have. And again, we're coming at this with a hub and spoke type approach. You can easily haul or 150 or 200 kilometers, and if it's good grade, you're not adding that much to your basic operating cost to do so. So if we can get a 500-700 ton a day operation here, a couple of those going, you put that all together, and all of a sudden you have a sizable mining operation. And that's what I've always liked about Niurite, is that's the potential I've seen there.
So I guess that takes me to another question I had about your acquisition strategy. So are you intending to acquire in the region, or do you have a larger acquisition strategy? Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
We're looking real hard in the region. I mean, obviously that's our concept. If we're offered something that I think is really good in South America, sure, we'll look at it. I mean, that we're in the business to create mines. So yeah, if the opportunity's there, we're not going to restrict ourselves. But my efforts, and I look daily at new properties, are kind of more regionally focused. But we just had one that we passed on that was up in Montana, and it looked pretty good, but I wouldn't want to try to permit a mine in Montana.
So the idea would be to look for assets in the region and maybe have this hub and spoke model. But if you found something appealing in another jurisdiction, that would also be part of the strategy. Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, we're business people. That's the business we're in, is developing and building mines. So yeah, if it looks great, you know, be happy to go to Philippines or the right place in Africa, but it would have to pass all the ticks in the box, all the checks in the boxes for everything that I look at.
Okay.
Yeah, you'll see some of the first acquisitions will definitely be within the area in and around Niary. That's a clear strategy, at least for us in the time being. Now, if something amazing came along in another jurisdiction and it was positive for shareholders, obviously we would definitely look at that. But I would expect any of the acquisitions we make in the near term will be relatively close to peak.
Okay. And I have a follow-up question for you, Greg. You said it would have to tick some boxes for you. Can you tell us what you look for in an acquisition? What would those points be?
Well, you've got infrastructure. Then you have your social issues, project potential size, and cost. I mean, we acquired this for about 2.5 cents an ounce, I think, something like that. I don't want to pay $100 or $10 an ounce for equivalent silver, or $100 an ounce for equivalent gold. It's got to be a reasonable amount. And then metallurgy is always a critical factor. There's two things you can't fix in a mining project. That's the grade. Grade's going to be what it is, and the recovery. Like I said before, if you can't get the metal out of the rock, it's just a rock.
And I had one more question about Niary, just because I think it's a region that not a lot of people are familiar with in terms of mining, maybe for vacationing. What is the mining culture like in the state of Niary? Is the state supportive? I just don't know a lot about it.
Yes. It's jobs. Mining is the highest paying blue collar job in the country by a long shot. So Niary, they're having their financial difficulties, so they want to see new jobs created. Niary really isn't that big in tourism, except for that little bit of the Puerto Vallarta Bay that crosses into Niary. Aside from that, it's agriculture. There's a fair amount of small, call them Gambesino type mining, except some of those guys do have mills. They may be mercury mills, but they have them. But no, the state of Niary really wants to see their economy grow. And I think right now, probably it's primarily agriculture. Sugarcane is a big thing in this area, but it doesn't generate a huge number of jobs. In fact, most of the labor for the harvesting of the cane actually comes from migrant workers from Oaxaca and Michoacan and Chiapas. So it's a lot of the men in Niurite have come north for work, so that leaves a vacancy that's for jobs that are filled by the people from southern Mexico. But again, it's not a huge money generating base for the state. So no, they're supportive. I think that can be seen in how quickly we got our drilling permits.
I think I based my perception 100% on an Air Canada's vacation commercial from like 3 years ago.
We just finished filming a video last week while Greg was at site. So that'll really kind of touch on the history a little bit of mining in Niary and some of the other mines in production. Gives you a good idea of the city of Tepic, which Greg mentioned has about 500,000 people. So it's a fair size. And the video will really give you kind of a proper sense of the community we're working in, and not so much the beach area, unfortunately.
Well, I look forward to the video, and I look forward to the site visit even more. How many IPOs do you have in the region?
We have 3. Our lawyers were just down meeting with all 3 of them this last week. I haven't had a chance to speak to the lawyers since they got back, but we'll be having some news on that very soon. So we get along well with the communities. It's one of the things I try to establish right off the bat is good community relations. And I mean, there's a lot of things that we can help them with that don't take a lot of capital, but they greatly appreciate the help.
In your timeline slide, you do mention a CSR program. What is that going to involve?
You've lost me with the acronym. CSR.
Community social relations.
Yeah, that's always an ongoing project. But no, we have daily contact with the Ejidatarios. I mean, we've got, I'm just guessing now, probably 10 or 15 people working for us now. And they're all locals. And that will be growing in the future. But no, the whole social community relationships in Mexico is very important. And that's where a lot of companies get off track, is by not paying attention to that from the very beginning.
Yeah, no, it's quite important. We'll actually have news on that relatively soon, as Greg had mentioned. So we are working with the communities. They're eager to have us. It's amazing when you go down there. They're all quite happy. It's a fairly well-known, smaller mining jurisdiction, so everyone is on board. As things progress and we move closer towards production, then obviously our CSR component will ramp up even further, and we're prepared for that. We're fortunate enough to have Alejandro on the board and being our country manager. He's helped permit multiple large mines in Mexico and dealing with the local communities and the governors. It's important to have that, and we're fortunate enough to have that all kind of built in already, at least that expertise.
Okay, great. Well, it's very important, as everyone knows. I have some questions about the drill project, but there's some questions that have been in the Q&A box longer, so I want to get to them.
Okay.
Let's step back and look at this from a macro perspective. I have a question asking, how do you see the current physical silver situation, and what is your outlook for the silver market?
That's a good question. I'll take a first stab at that and then let Greg follow up. So we do have generally some silver slides in why Mexico, why silver within our presentation. I took it out for this just for time sensitivity reasons. Yeah, it's interesting. I know Greg was around for the last silver boom. I kind of caught the little bit of tail end of it. What I like about silver is it is a bit of a proxy to gold in terms of precious metals and fiat currencies, and kind of a hedge for that, but it's also used in quite a few processes as well. So I'm definitely bullish on silver. We saw the whole silver squeeze initiative, kind of started a few months ago, which was great. In terms of, I was happy it didn't run up too high for the time being, but it brought a lot of attention, a lot of focus to kind of those online Robinhood traders and people in the markets now that hadn't really understood silver and kind of the potential behind it. So we're cautiously optimistic that silver will continue to climb, and as more investors and people get interested, we are bullish longer term. One thing that is important to us, and Greg will attest to it, is even if silver hangs around these levels, we're actually really comfortable with that, especially for Tepic and the other projects we're looking at. But if we do get into a proper silver bull market, we'll be ready for that. It could be quite exciting. I was around, I guess, at Canaccord during those days, and there's nothing quite like it. So it could be quite exciting, and we're excited.
I think one thing that really doesn't get enough attention is the uses of both silver and gold. Everything you have that's electronic, the only reason it works is because you've got silver wiring covered by gold, moving the electricity around. I mean, I always tell people, take the top of the box off your computer and look at the motherboard, or look at the motherboard for anything that's electronic, and you see all these silver wires, and gold-colored wires, and that's gold plated onto silver wiring, because the gold keeps the silver from oxidizing. That's the closest thing we have to a superconductor today. And now with this big push on electric vehicles and renewable energy, all that takes a huge amount, will take a huge amount of gold and silver to just to make it work, the circuitry in it work. You look at your cell phone. Each individual cell phone contains a very minute amount of gold and silver. But I read somewhere where there's 1 billion cell phones being made now every year. And if you look at it, the population of the Earth is over 7 billion. Everywhere I've been, I was 120 kilometers off a paved road in Botswana, and we pulled into a little village, and it was mud and wattle buildings. But what was everyone doing? They were all sitting around playing with their cell phones. So I mean, there's a huge consumption there that I don't think people really appreciate, and it's just going to get more and more with this push for renewables and electric vehicles.
I think we all are aware now that our cell phones are made to break and be replaced.
Yeah. I think, what was it? It was 2 or 3 million ounces of gold end up in the garbage dump every year from cell phones being thrown away. So stop and think about the amount of computers that get thrown away, all the electronics and cars that get junked. I mean, it's just people don't have an appreciation really for where things come from, I don't think.
It's true. We could go on a very long tangent
Yes,
on
yeah,
one. But let's go back to talking about the drill program, your phase 1 program. So you have the historic resource, you're working towards upgrading it to a 43-101. That program, those 21 holes, are they mostly like twinning? Are you stepping out? What's the strategy?
I think the first thing is because core recovery was so poor, we have to figure out what it's. If you get 100%, which you will get with a reverse circulation rig, we're going to be using what they call a face sampling hammer. And for people that don't know what reverse circulation is you use dual-walled pipe and a hydraulic air hammer. And the air is forced down the outer tube of the pipe. It powers the hammer. And then at the center of the hammer, there's a hole that leads up into the inner tube where the sample goes. And to make sure you get all the sample, they actually create what's called a Venturi effect at the drill bit. You do that by taking air and forcing it down through a smaller aperture. That's going up into this hole. So in turn, it's like creating a vacuum cleaner right at the drill bit. So it sucks everything up. So the first order of business for me was, okay, let's solve this recovery problem and see what happens when we get full recovery. And once we have the assays back from that, then we'll move on from there. And a lot of that will determine what our next step is going to be.
Yeah, so in essence, phase one will be to test the recoveries, and that will be majority of twinning holes. And then phase two will move right into exploration, and we'll have news on that as well in the not too distant future.
Okay, great. And I've got some more questions about the claim block, so maybe you can pull that slide up while I ask the questions, Alex. So the main Tepic claim block seems to have a couple of donut holes. Are they owned by private or public companies?
Private. There's no other public company in there. We're in negotiations right now, so I'd prefer not to talk about it too much. I don't want to have some troublemakers coming in on us.
You don't want me to scoop your assets, Greg?
Not you. It's there's a lot of people that make their business out of being a pain, make their money out of being a pain. So actually, most of that area is much higher in elevation, and there's it's a rhyolite that is maybe younger than mineralization, or maybe it was deposited right at the waning time of this whole big hydrothermal system. But there's opal mines up there, and opal can be indicative of being right at the very top of the system. So enough said on that, please.
And are you looking for a mill in the region? Is there a mill in the region? Is this part of your hub and spokes?
Yeah, there was a mill we actually looked at, and we're talking with the owners of that. We've kept the dialogue open with them, but there's plenty of places to build a mill. And again, it'll depend on this hub and spoke. You want it to be a central. So some of the acquisitions we're working on now would kind of, if those come to fruition, would kind of determine where you put your mill. I should add that there on the corner of the map, you see La Curva is a little community. I think half the houses are empty because the owners have gone north for work. But if you look there, you can see there's a black line that kind of runs off to the north through the corner of our property and on up. That's the central rail line for in Mexico for the Pacific corridor. And it actually then ties in, goes up to Guadalajara, and then on into the Altiplano. But it's the major rail route through Western Mexico. So we can always, and there's a siting right there at La Curva. So we could load onto a train if the price is right and take it on up to, again, a central facility. So we have a lot of transportation options here too.
That's good. Like you said, proximity to infrastructure is key. A couple more questions and then we can wrap up. So for the assays, are you going to be using one lab or various labs? And what are the pros and cons of using more than one lab?
Well, you always, I mean, you pick an accredited lab. I've always felt that if you can't trust the lab, you shouldn't be using it. But we're using an accredited lab, BV, inspectorate. But then we will be running check assay programs, you always do, using another lab, perhaps Chemex or whoever comes in with the right bid. I generally like to run check assays on about every 10th ore zone, and then I run the entire, both the pulps, which is the BV will be preparing, and the drill rejects. We also collect the assay rejects. We also collect a second sample that we store. It's called the drill reject. It's a split that's made there at the drill rig, and we'll be running check assays on that. But it's just good standard industry practice to run your check assay programs at a second accredited lab.
Okay. And then one last question, which is really about your shareholder base and capital structure. If you want to pull that slide up, Alex. So from the audience, is it right that there are more than 10 significant institutional holders? Who are they? If you could tell us or give us some indication of categorization.
Yeah.
And are you in discussions with these parties or others to take more shares?
That's a good question. Yeah. So it's approximately 10 institutional shareholders, I would say. It's really quite interesting where they're located. There's two large ones in the US. One is over $1 billion in terms of their holdings. There are a number in Europe, one in particular, Commodity Capital, who's one of the top performing funds in the world the last 3 years. They're our largest institutional shareholder. They're really friendly. They like we're building. They invested alongside at least myself at Prime and at Millennial Lithium. They've indicated that they would, obviously like to, increase their share position if all goes well. We also have a few shareholders in Hong Kong as well, and Australia. So it's really a neat gambit in terms of our institutional shareholders, and London as well. So I would say 2 in the US, 2 or 3 in Australia, 2 or 3 in Hong Kong, and then 3 or 4 in Europe. So yeah, that's kind of the bit, I guess, the makeup of those institutional investors.
And we're going to do some more meetings soon.
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah, the last raise, maybe I'll get into that a little bit to let everyone know how that happened. So we were looking to raise 8 million. We had clear indications. We had some really strong brokers in the deal, based in Vancouver, some from Canaccord, Haywood, PI. We kind of had the deal already done. A lot of that was ourselves and then through their clients. As the story got out a little bit, some of these institutions actually came to us and were looking for large positions. We cut them back kind of as much as we could. So in essence, the raise was 15 million, but the order book was well over 30. It was a number that we were comfortable with, that they were comfortable with, that allows us to, do some of these acquisitions right away without having to go back to the market. So it just shows a little bit of the demand that was there.
And Alex has done a great job with the share structure. And I didn't want to see it get blown out.
Yeah, we don't have any warrants against us other than the broker warrant. So that was also a big deal for us. When we made the first project acquisition, we didn't want to have any share issuances for the time being. You'll notice probably the next acquisition as well. It'll just be cash, it won't be share issuances. Again, that allows us to control our share structure. As we do develop and as we look at larger projects, it could be something that we use if we're able to get our share price to a valuation that we're comfortable with, and we're making further acquisitions, then that could be something that we can lean on to use. But for the time being, we're really happy with being able to do it internally with cash on hand.
Yeah, well, it's a nice tight share structure, and your float's even tighter, but you're getting liquidity this week, so that's good.
Yeah.
Did a good job with choosing your shareholders carefully as well.
And we'll start getting the story out as well. So it's kind of my expertise and what I like to do. So we'll start with the Frankfurt listing. We'll move to a US listing. There's a number of newsletter writers that are shareholders, and we've been chatting with some really top-notch marketing people. Kind of the last 12 years of what I've been doing, I've been able to bring in everybody I like to work with, including Adelaide, of course. And so we have some really, really great people kind of involved. It's a partnership. It's not just myself and Greg. There's a number of other individuals and really top-notch people. So we're excited.
Yeah, well, it's a great story and a great team. Maybe just in summary at the end, you can give us sort of the selling features for Sierra Madre and what investors can expect over the coming months.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're all well financed. We have 15 million in the bank. We will be spending that, which is quite exciting. We have a good resource base of the Tepic project. That will be kind of the start of what we're building. Expect news on drilling shortly, and then a very significant second drilling campaign shortly thereafter. We are on the hunt for further projects. We hope to have some of those brought into us within the year and continue moving forward. So we're excited. We think our valuation is quite fair for the time being. If you look at any of the comps, we're probably on the lower end of where we'd like to be. But with what we achieve and as we de-risk and as we move forward, I'm sure we'll be moving up that relatively quickly.
Sounds good. I really appreciate the update. Thank you for your time, Alex and Greg, and thank you to the audience for participating, and congrats on a successful listing. Certainly exciting times.
Great. Thank you so much.